Joining me this time on my video cast is Peter Smith, broadcast journalist for Sky Sports Soccer Saturday. A very warm welcome to you, Pete.
Thank you.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. A few weeks ago, I saw an intriguing tweet that you put out on Twitter. You were talking about a book called Tunnel Vision. And you said, the forward takes me back 40 years and to a life-changing moment of fate. I just wondered what that was.
Two life-changing moments of fate, to be honest with you, in my life. That was the night, the 2nd of September, 1981. I just left school. Liverpool were a big team, champions of Europe at the time. When I was a kid growing up, my dad, his best friend used to live in Liverpool, my Uncle Jack, and we used to go to a game at Anfield every year when Kevin Keegan was a Liverpool player. And those were some of the highlights of childhood. But there I was, just left school, not knowing where I was going in life, had enough money to be able to take my old man to Liverpool's first home game of the season. And he had a little Canon camera with him that he used. He was a big photography fan like yourself, and he was good at it. But it was just a small Canon camera with an inbuilt lens, inbuilt flash. And we were sitting in, I think it was row J, seats 18 and 19. And I said to him, Dad, could you get some photographs of the Liverpool players running out? Thinking that he'd got a zoom lens. I knew he jumped over the front of the stand into the paddock. And I looked for a moment. And then moments later, I saw him right by the side of the pitch. And the Liverpool players emerged from the tunnel, led out by Phil Thompson, and Bruce Grobler was making his Liverpool debut. And there's my old fella, who was a revered PE teacher, who was the most law-abiding citizen ever, who always went with the rule book, having broken the rules, and he was there with his camera snapping away at the Liverpool players coming out of the tunnel. It was quite amazing, really. And we had tickets for the following game, the Saturday game against Arsenal. He said, I'm going to do that again. And I never believed him. I thought, he's going to get turfed out. He's going to get his collar felt. Somebody's going to block him. And lo and behold, we went into the stand. He jumped over the main stand, back of the wall, into the paddock. The next thing I know, I see him laughing with the head stewards at the top of the tunnel. And then I look, and then he stopped the great Pat Jennings, one of the greatest goalkeepers ever, who was playing for Arsenal that day, stopped him and got a photograph of him. And he sort of he became part of the furniture there. He did that every game and became, how on earth he got away with it.
Yeah. And so no stewards tried to stop him running.
Well, somebody from above clocked him and said that he had to have official authorization to be there after about 5 minutes. A guy called Derek Anderton, who could really and should have thrown him out, the head steward there. But he let him carry on, which was fantastic for me, really. And because my dad had got this access in the sanctum at Liverpool, amazingly, the summer afterwards, there was a fate-changing day in my life where I turned right instead of left in the old market hall where I used to work at the greengrocer's store. Went up some escalators into the Ondale Centre, and there was the hospital radio that were doing an outside broadcast and a fundraising day. And it was, should I go and ask them about whether they've got a sports program or whether I could get involved? And because I knew that I would potentially have access to Liverpool players or access to Anfield, then I asked and said I could offer them potentially something, and it all went from there. And Derek, who was the steward that should have thrown me dead out, Derek Anderton, who wrote the book Tunnel Vision Anfield, he used to take a lenient view on myself as well, and he used to fix up interviews with massive stars for me from our sport radio program. So those 2 days of fate really changed my life. And here I speak now with 33 years professional broadcast experience, but it's absolutely amazing. It couldn't have happened. I asked myself, I've got memorabilia of it now in the house that I look at and I smile. And the funny thing was as well, when Liverpool won the championship in 2020, Gabriel Clark on ITV did a fantastic program about Liverpool. And I was watching it one night, and my dad ran across the screen. I still got it on video. Obviously, I haven't seen my dad. He passed in 2010. I obviously hadn't seen him since that night he passed in Blackburn Hospital, and he runs across the screen from right to left. Bob Paisley's got the trophy. Dad's there. It was quite a moment, actually. I loved it. It spooked me out in a very nice way.
Yes.
Because when you haven't seen your dad for 10 years and all of a sudden he runs across your television screen from right to left, his little Canon camera, and he's peaked hat on, and he's brown jacket as a school teacher. Yeah, it's yeah, phenomenal days, good days to look back on, happy days and happy times. And yeah, rather than feel bad about seeing my dad, I felt really chuffed. I was really proud to see him.
Yeah.
Wish I could see him.
Oh, what a fantastic story, Pete. So from there, you kind of just made your way through hospital radio and onwards.
Yeah, they were fantastic days working for hospital radio. Wonderful days. The people at Burnley General were. It was a big thing in that particular era. You know, because the request show was massive. The live game from Turf Moor was massive. You know, it was a big part of the hospital community was hospital radio. Yeah. And being able to join the sports team there and, you know, bring in big name interviews that we used to do for the program on a Wednesday, it was fantastic background. You know, another ambition at the time was to go to all the 92 Football League clubs in England, which I accomplished. Radio broadcaster, and wherever I went, I always trying to do some sort of feature or encounter some sort of personality. So it was the best learning curve ever. I didn't get paid for it, but it's the best investment that I ever made. It was wonderful. I also learned the art of football commentary on the worst games in Burnley Football Club's history. I mean, we're looking now at Burnley, and people obviously across the world will know them because they're now looking forward to a 6th season in the Premier League. Yeah. But in that, they were in the 4th division, and in 86, 87, they were 90 minutes from oblivion. You know, so yeah, everything about the 80s. I love the 80s. The music I'm obsessed with. A real sort of like proper sad 80s man. I had a bit of the 70s man as well, but that era of my life is very, very happy. I don't live in the past. I know my sister reckons that I do. You listen, if you work in my professions, you can't live in the past. I like to visit the past. I love going back.
But wasn't that great? That, I mean, the hospital radio, you got to cut your teeth and learn your skills in an environment that was friendly and safe, and you could make your mistakes and it wasn't the end of the world, and you got that experience and the confidence to just kind of take you on and, you know, go further.
That is true. I think looking back, I don't really think too many of the interviews, well, certainly the early ones anyway, probably wouldn't have carried any journalistic sting. Not like the ones that you've got to provide in the modern era, or the ones that I've tried to provide down the years. But it was just a background in knowing what to expect in terms of the characters that you were dealing with, how the game runs, and to have the confidence of speaking to Kevin Keegan's my all-time favourite player. He was the first ever person I interviewed. You know, he was as big in those days as Messi and Ronaldo is now. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the access that you get nowadays is impossible practically, and it wasn't in those days. You still would get rebounded, you still would get knocked back, but at least you got the chance to be knocked back face to face. And more often than not, people said yes anyway.
Yeah, because there was less media around.
It was great learning, but then you only learn for real. Nothing can prepare you for the tabloid storm. You know, if you start covering a club like Manchester United, it's the biggest story on the planet, and you arrive as a sort of like wet-faced young pup covering United, and you're not. I wasn't prepared for the tabloid storm around me. I still got used to it. Yeah. And I knew eventually, and I became very, very good at operating in and around it. So you only learn properly when you're doing it for real, you know, when there's currency at stake and you have to deliver. Yeah, and hospital radio is fantastic because, you know, there's no real pressure, there's no real quality control. You know, when you're working for Sports News and other big organisations, there's plenty of quality control. You know, and you've got to get the story and you've got to ask the questions, and that's all part of it.
Let me take you back though to that time when you were interviewing Kevin Keegan, your first interview, your hero. What was that like?
I still know it was at Rotherham United. It was not long after he left Southampton to join Newcastle. He scored 4 goals for Newcastle in a 5-1 win at Rotherham. BBC covered the game, so there's still footage on YouTube, and I'll have it on disc and on video as well, somewhere around. Yeah, it was quite a surreal moment, really. And Emlyn Hughes was the manager of Rotherham. He was the player manager of Rotherham. Right. 2 players from that Liverpool European Cup winning team from 1977. Those were my first 2 interviews, and I sort of like can feel now adrenaline and a burn of that day. And I always love going to Rotherham United. I think it's one of the best new build grounds in the country. Oh, and I've got a big mate at Rotherham United, and I think Rotherham United fans are loyal, and they support the local town club. But the thing I like about Rotherham is Millmoor is still standing. The old ground is still standing. And I'll always stop there every time I go there, and just I don't know. It's not a sad thing. I don't think it's like I feel my old fella's presence, because I just remember that feeling of being there that day, my dad being there with me, and my dad taking photographs, and like the pride and the happiness and the satisfaction it gave me that day. And I know I'm nostalgic and maybe someone who, like I said before, likes to go back in the past. But whenever I got to Rotherham, I always got Millmoor, and I always stand there and I go, that was the day, Dad. That was the fantastic day. Always will live with me. It's a really sort of important day in my life. Fantastic day.
I mean, the day you get to meet, your favourite player or your hero, it does stay with you, doesn't it? And the fact that you got to interview them, I don't think I could have done that. I'd have been too nervous to interview him.
The way as well, though, I mean, not everybody was as helpful as Kevin Keegan and Emlyn Hughes were. Sometimes there is the old saying about don't meet your hero, because you can be sometimes a little bit disappointed. And I can well understand that. I've seen plenty of that down the years. Many, in fact.
I was lucky. Mine was Brian Robson, and I met him for Manchester United Radio, and he was fantastic. And it was, do you remember the night? It was a Champions League night when there was that accident on the Barton Bridge, and the lorry had come over the side, and the kickoff got put back 45 minutes. And we had got no audio left. We always had like a 2-minute thereabouts interview with Fergie before kickoff, and that was all we had left. And we had 45 minutes to fill. And I went and got everybody that was in the press lounge and in the VIP lounge on a rota to come in and do interviews. And it was journalists and former players. And I mean, luckily it was a cold night. They were bored. They wanted to come, come and do something, and they were fine. And I was short an interview, and Brian Robson was in the VIP sitting talking to Paddy Crerand. And I went over to him and introduced myself, and I said, look, could you come and do us an interview? And I'm sat down at the table with them. And he's like, no, because stuff was going on at Middlesbrough, and he didn't want to get caught, in an interview that might be a bit controversial. And he was like, no, I don't want to. And Paddy was like, go on, help her out, she's stuck. And he was like, no. And I was like, but you can't say no, you're my hero. He looked at me and he just kind of, oh, come on, man. And we went off, and he was fantastic. But and after that, he always was happy to do an interview if he was around. But I think I couldn't have done the interview. My heart's beating now just thinking about it, extra fast. I couldn't have done the interview. Thank goodness Matt was there to do it. So when I met you, you were the match reporter, the match day reporter, interviewer of the players for Manchester United Radio. That must have been a really challenging job, to go and grab players off of the pitch well, how did it work? Because I never saw your side of it, because obviously I was in the studio. So the full-time whistle goes, kind of paint the picture of how that worked.
Well, nowadays it's all orchestrated, and it has to be. There's so many international rights holders as well as domestic rights holders in the Premier League. Everything is orchestrated. Back in those Man United Radio days that you're referring to, and the Man United Club Call days, it was just a bum fight. But the thing is, I had the best access. I had the access. I stood right outside the Manchester United dressing room, and for much of that period, had a very, very good relationship with Sir Alex Ferguson. Well, very, very good. It was unbelievably good, and then it all turned very, very sour, and it was sour for a long time.
Before you go on to how it turned sour, I know you say on your website that it was very good and then it turned sour after the treble, but what privileges were you able to get by having such a good relationship with him in the beginning?
Privileges. It's unbelievable things happen, Ruth. It's like I look back now. I mean, I always tell everybody this story about dozens, well, hundreds of young girls screaming at me in the Republic of Ireland. Seriously, I walked off the bus I walked off the Manchester United team bus at Dundalk, and there were hundreds and hundreds of girls screaming at me. At least I thought it was. And I looked over my shoulder and.
Did they know who you were?
I'm not so sure, actually. But that going on the Manchester United team bus to a game, which happened a number of times, especially pre-season, especially abroad, and that was quite unreal. I mean, and I always used to have a very, very strict policy of when you're on the team bus, don't speak until you're spoken to. So most of the time I'd be quiet, but then sometimes people would come across and they would chat, and Fergie'd come across and he'd chat. Because as well, he obviously knew I had a wide knowledge of Northwest football, so he'd pick my brains on certain things that were happening in the region.
All right.
But he made you part of it. He'd in the sort of 90s, he would make sure I dined with him at night time. He'd mark my card on stories. I had all his telephone numbers. I had his home number, his car phone number, his office number, his mobile number. I had 4 numbers for him. I didn't used to ring him unless I needed to.
Yeah.
But that's how close we were at the time. And as well, being allowed in the changing room when they won titles, and being allowed in the changing room at Wembley when they'd won the FA Cup. Things like that money, you think how much money people pump into Manchester United, and even the well sponsors that were paying gazillions of pounds, even then, wouldn't be allowed anything like the access that I had. I saw the photographs to prove that I was there, and it's not a dream. But yeah, that said, I mean, you had to dig in for your interviews. They don't highly paid footballers don't come out of the dressing room and go, "Hello, Peter, how are you? Would you like to interview me on my?" You've got to really dig in. And obviously Manchester United is the biggest story on the planet, and everybody swarms around it, and everybody wants that story. Yeah. So I had to use now some really dig in to get what I wanted and what I needed. But having access to people like Eric Cantona and Roy Keane and people, I had access to be able to ask them face to face. Sometimes he said yes, sometimes he said no. Sometimes when he said yes, you got exclusive material and top material.
And what were you doing with that material then?
Well, obviously, use it at a certain time or synchronize it at a certain time to make sure that our friends from the tabloids couldn't get hold of it.
Yeah.
And spin it. Which I found a way of doing that. Not that I've got anything against the tabloid lads, because they're all big mates of mine, but it's part of the game you play as a journalist, especially when you cover a club like Manchester United, that make sure you safeguard what material you're getting and what news you're getting. But no, for me, probably the best working days of my life, and also going into Europe as well, going to every European away game, and going as well to Tokyo for the Intercontinental Cup final in '99 and being in Rio in 2000. Probably the highlights of my working life, really. They were absolutely amazing. So to be on side with Fergie is fantastic. To be offside with him isn't always the easiest.
And what brought about that change?
Something or nothing, really. I've not made it public yet, Ruth. I've been asked it before. And I've never, I mean, I say made it public. I've spoken about it. I speak about it to university students every year. And I've spoken about it at a couple of business clubs. For me, something and nothing. And I don't know why it had to happen or why he took such a stance. I know that I reacted angrily back to him, which probably didn't do me any favors initially.
Oh.
But we had a really bizarre relationship after it. Really strange sort of going on. I was always amazed that he never got rid of me from the tunnel.
Radio station, did you?
Well, obviously, you yourself, we were working together. I used to give you the interview for the radio station after every game. And I think with me, he put up with me because I was the devil that he knew. He was always very suspicious of anybody new and all that.
Yes.
But we had a really bizarre relationship. You know, I sort of like tell people it was like we were like Hinge and Bracket. You know, the two famous comedians from the 60s and 70s. Yeah, he would. I'll tell you one thing he would do. He used to try and intimidate me all the time. He would like walk down the tunnel because he threw me out of. I told you about the privileged access that I had. He threw me out of there, out of the dressing room area for something that had nothing to do with me. But he threw me out because of something that happened that irritated him, that didn't concern me. And I had a big rant over him about it, but he wouldn't change his mind. So he used to station me in the tunnel, and he would walk down to do my interview when he'd done his TV rights holders, and he'd always have his head down. He wouldn't look at me ever. And then when I asked the first question, he would look up at me then. And then at the end of the interview, I'd go, "Thank you very much," and he'd gone. Turned and he'd gone. You know, it's all part of his being the boss, sort of like but I wasn't intimidated by it because I never used to. You'll know yourself, Ruth, when you used to queue those interviews up, right? I never ever called him by name.
No.
I used to him with a question. So there was no pleasantries or anything. It was business. It was pure business. He had to do the interview for the rights holders and for the radio station that we used to work for. So he had to do it.
Yeah.
I was quite happy to do it because it was part of my profession. So I didn't want to not do it.
No.
But down, look at you halfway through the first question. Boom, I'm going to hit you with a question. You know, and that was it. He was like that for 3.5 years with me.
Right. But I mean, I think I always felt with him, particularly with players, if they challenged him or questioned his, authority, he wasn't at all keen on them after that. And perhaps it was a bit of that.
I'll tell you one thing that I've never said before about how things thawed. And I took a really, really big gamble, really, and did something. I don't regret it. I was glad that I did it. Do you remember he had a right old thing about United not getting penalties? I think it was like 2003 full season. Whole thing about people not getting penalties. And our interview that we did, because he wouldn't go and see the national media because he'd fallen out with them.
Oh yes, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So the interview that he did with me, in effect, formed the press conference as well. So my interview went everywhere, which I didn't have a problem with. So I always felt a sense of responsibility that you would have to cover all angles and you would have to ask questions that you might not particularly like.
Yeah.
To do your job properly and be a thorough professional. But he had a right old cob on about United not getting penalties. So what he wanted to do was, I know he used to do it plenty of times, he'd sow the seed, he'd say something controversial, knowing that would get played out and all the national newspaper lads and everybody would pick up on that point and it'd be all over the place. So it'd be back page news. The referees would obviously see it, the FAA would see it, and then any referee who was refereeing his next game would think 50-50 decision, I better point to the spot. That was what he was trying to do.
Yes.
Right. So he said, you might even remember the interview, Ruth, because obviously you cued it, and Matt Proctor, the presenter, always talks about it. So he said in the interview, we got a penalty in January, so we've used our quarter. We're not going to get another penalty all season. Bearing in mind this was like November time, so I said, just can we get this straight? You're saying because you got a penalty last season in January that you're not going to get another penalty in the remainder of this football season, which had another 6 months to run. He went, right. And I went, are you sure that it's not just down to coincidence? And he just turned and he went, listen, I probably saved him an FA charge, really. If I'd let him develop that point that he wanted to make, he would have been charged by the FA. So he went off, he stormed off of the tunnel. I thought I'll just give you the interview. So I handed it over to yourself and you played it. I never told you about the end. And Matt Proctor, who was presenting the station, he half was listening to the interview half was queuing up the next thing, half telling you your instructions for the next bit of the running order. And normally Matt's signal at the end of the interview would be, "Oh, thank you for speaking to us." And he would know then to put the fader up or move on and do the next thing. But because there wasn't a natural thank you at the end of it, because he stormed off, then Matt went, "We appear to have lost contact with the tunnel area there."
I was gone by then.
Then the following game, it was Barnet in the League Cup, and I got warned by his press secretary. She said, "He's after you. He's really gunning for you, absolutely gunning for you." And that game against Barnet, it was a nothing game really. Their goalkeeper got sent off for handling the ball right on the edge of the penalty area. He caught the ball, he just took it beyond the 18-yard line. He should really have just been yellow carded, but the referee took it to the letter of the law and sent him off, much to the aghast of the United fans who wanted him to stay on. And it changed the game. They put 2 past the standing goalkeeper, and against 10 men from the 4th tier, it was an absolute nothing game. So he came out in the tunnel afterwards, and the old proverbial hairdryer that you hear of. He wagged his finger in my face. He went, "Listen, you, none of your smart ass stuff ever again from you ever, you hear me?" Right, and then he used some rude words that obviously we can't use on a family show like this, Ruth. But they were very, very rude words and very, very strong words. And the finger kept wagging in my face, right? And he went, "Come on, get on with this interview." And as soon as he said, "Get on with this interview," I went, "Was the referee a little bit harsh in sending Ross Flitney off?" And it sort of knocked him back a little bit. He wasn't expecting it. I think he was expecting me to be cowering a little bit from his telling off and his finger wagging in my face.
Right.
But because I'd known him that long and I'd been around him that long, and I was fed up of him at that stage.
Yeah.
And I just launched in with that question about Ross Flitney. Was the referee a little bit harsh? And it sort of like took him back a little bit, and he turned and went, he's had it again. And you know what I was telling you about what he used to do, about he would just like turn on his heels and walk away.
Yeah.
At the end of the interview, I just walked off. And everyone said,
"Good for you, Pete."
He finished his last question, or his last answer, and I just walked. I just went. I thought, I've had enough.
Yeah.
It was probably a silly thing to do, and it was a rude thing to do if you're talking about good manners and all that.
Well,
But
he was rude to you all the time.
yeah, well, I had enough of it. And strangely enough, after that, he thawed, and we
Right.
got back to the days. And it was still a business type interview that we did and all that. But then he would like instead of not looking down at the floor, he would look me in the eye, and then sometimes there might be a little bit of small talk before we started. That used to be in the good old days.
Yeah.
And
But he had more
yeah,
respect for you.
I've always told people as well that when you've been in the doghouse with him for as long as I was in the doghouse for, which was like 3.5 years,
Right.
nothing's scared. Nobody can scare me in this industry. And when I've been in like really difficult situations with managers working for Sky and that down the years, the preparation of his lordship, having in the doghouse, you couldn't be in anybody's doghouse better than his if you want to be able to have and be able to withstand intimidation and pressure from managers. Nothing can scare you after that. Nothing scared me anyway.
I remember Matt Proctor telling a story, because he used to go and do the pre-match interviews with Fergie at the training ground, and they would have breakfast and they'd go and sit in his office and do the interview, and they're sitting there chatting after the interview, just kind of passing the time of day, and the phone rings, and it's Paul Hintz from the Manchester Evening News, and the manager said to him, "I told you you mustn't call for however many days, and it's only 50 days," and he slams the phone down. It's just like, to actually know, how many days it had been since he'd set the ban. And it's like, God, it makes you wonder how the brain ticks, really, when you...
I mean, most journos that have been around Manchester United for a lot of years, the frontline guys, they'll all tell you similar stories of getting on the wrong side, because like I said at the top of the interview, it's the biggest story in the world. It's the biggest football story anywhere on the planet. I know that Real Madrid and Barcelona and clubs have got Liverpool a massive story, but United's the biggest club, the biggest story, and anybody really, realistically, or any journalist will tell you who's worked around football that everybody's been in trouble for running something, asking a question, setting an agenda. But yeah, he would have his his little way of not fining people, but punishing people. And yeah, the Manchester Evening News, Stuart Matheson will tell you, there were plenty of bans here, there, and everywhere for lots of things. It's just the way it is in journalism. It's hard for fans to understand, and sometimes I wonder whether fans care, because like a group of rogues in a press room will talk about this, that, and the other, and some of us reminisce about the times of getting on the wrong side of Fergie and the little battles that we had, and that. And there's lots of interesting tales that are told, and we laugh about them amongst ourselves. But then you wonder whether fans really care. I'm not so sure they do, really.
No, I don't suppose they've really thought about it. Because, I mean, if you get your news from a newspaper and you read the stories, or you see the interviews on television, or you hear something on radio, I don't suppose many people stop to think about the backstory of how that story got to them, unless there's someone that wants to go into the industry and is interested in, how that footage came to be. But who was your favourite player then that you've interviewed? Not necessarily at United, but overall, who's your favourite player?
I don't know, really. I suppose, really, when you sort of covering as much football as a cover, it all becomes a blur at times. I always like people who speak their mind and are honest, and you can ask anything you want of them, really. I like a guy called Carl Robinson at Oxford United, a Scousman. He's done really well, led them to the playoffs in 2021. He will always answer any questions that you can ask anything. Ronnie Moore used to be Tranmere Rovers manager, Hartlepool manager. He was always great for answering anything. I suppose my favourites are the ones who always say yes to an interview.
Yeah.
Really,
I know exactly what you mean.
A few of those people like John McGinley at Bolton was great for that. Good Scottish upbringing, and no matter what the score was, and no matter what the situation. That's maybe John McGinley at Bolton Wanderers would be a good answer in that respect, because he never ever good Scottish upbringing, never ever turned down an interview.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I agree with you. The people that say yes, or the people that, if they've forgotten about your interview, ring you up and apologise afterwards, which is a rare thing.
Well, you get plenty of rebuffs in this industry, I can assure you that.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt it. Do you think you've got a funniest moment from interviewing players?
Funniest moment? I suppose there's been a few outrageous answers. I remember Julian Dix used to play for West Ham and Liverpool. When he was at Liverpool, I asked him at the end of an interview, who do you think will win the Premier League title when United and Blackburn were going head-to-head in '95? And he went, Blackburn. I said, why do you think that? He said, because I can't stand United. That was a pretty good answer.
My favourites used to be when we had a foreign player at United and they'd come with a interpreter, and you would ask the question, and then the interpreter would translate it, and then back again. It would take forever for you to do an interview.
Yeah, and I think some of those interviews, they're not good for audio, and they're also not good for some of the newspaper journalists neither, because very often the people who do the interpreting tell you what they want you to be told. The great story about a very, very well-known footballer from Spain came to play in the Northwest, and a journalist that I know asked a question of this very, very well-known Spanish star, and he looked at the player's body language whilst he was answering the question, and he could tell that he was passionate or irritated by one of the questions that he'd asked, or the way he was answering it.
Yeah.
And the answer from the interpreter didn't really match the body language. So he knocked on the door of his local school, his local high school, asked if there was a Spanish department, asked if he could bob in at the end of teaching to see the Spanish teacher. And when he got the proper translation, it wasn't the translation that he got from the interpreter. It was something a whole lot stronger. But the interpreter wanted to keep on side with the football club and not wanting to spark a huge controversy, had dampened down what he said.
Oh, right. Oh, that's not on, is it? That's not on. I remember a Champions League press conference on the training day at United, and they'd got, I think it was a Spanish team, and the Spanish manager was sat there and the translator, and the manager had answered a question, and it was a long-winded answer that he'd given, and the interpreter just said no. That was the translation. No, and it's like, well, maybe he did say no, but there were a few other words in that no that might have been useful. But no, it was. The
truth. I used to smile about Eric Cantona in the early days at United because he used to pretend that he couldn't speak English. There's a guy called George Scanlon who used to be the interpreter for Andrei Kanchelskis, who spoke fluent Russian. And if you wanted to do an interview with Eric Cantona, he used to be quite obliging. But I always remember one day Albert Morgan, the kit manager down at the Cliff, he'd taken a telephone call from a garage, so that Eric's car wasn't going to be ready. There'd been some mechanical defect with it, and I remember there's a couple of us just hanging around like we did at the Cliff. Cantona came down the stairs, and the kit manager went, "Oh, right, the guy's been on from the garage. He says your car ain't going to be ready until tomorrow. There's something wrong on that bonnet that's going to take a while, and they need another part." And Cantona's expression, he obviously understood what the kit manager was telling him, and his Manchester accent, and then came out with a lot of expletives to suggest that he was rather frustrated that he was not going to get his car back at the end of the day. So we knew that. I thought, yeah, your English isn't as bad as you're making out. I think it sort of protects them from the masses. I believe that Marcelo Bielsa's English at Leeds United, he's probably better than he makes out.
Yes.
But then if he does start, there's so much interest in him that if he did English interviews, he likes to concentrate on football matters and not media matters. But there are a few that have sort of hidden behind don't really speak English when they do, to keep the mass media away from them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. Sometimes I give them the benefit of the doubt that they just don't quite have as good as English as they'd like and don't want to say something accidentally in error. But I think the majority of the time it's easier for them, isn't it, not to speak the language that they're meant to be speaking. Before we move away from football, we can't really without talking about the Super League and everything that created there. I mean, I can remember the Super League being muted back when I worked at United. I don't think I realised, though, that it was going to be just a midweek tournament. I thought it was going to be a big breakaway. You didn't play Premiership, you didn't play, Cup. But I really can't believe that the owners just thought that we'd all say, yeah, that's great, let's go and do that. But what's your view? Do you think it will stay away, or do you think it's going to come back?
No, I've never believed in it ever. I mean, it's nothing new. People were saying in the 1980s and 1990s that it would happen, and one day this and one day that. I've always said I believe it when we see it. I mean, I remember the day I was working, I was at a game, and speaking to the producer, he said, "I'm working on Super League," and that was the first I heard of it. So I thought, "So are you doing the Warrington versus Hull KR game?"
Yes.
League Super League. He went, "Oh no," he said, "this is broken." So first reaction was, is it April Fool's Day? Same as Bill Kenwright came out with. Then I thought, well, obviously the Loch Ness Monster's been given up on, and there haven't been any alien sightings on Earth. No, I just knew it wouldn't be. There's too many hurdles it had to overcome, and obviously a furious fan backlash that you knew what was coming. Yeah. And also as well, I just thought, well, let them go. What people don't realise is, if anybody thinks that this idea or this concept is going to work, you'll know yourself from Champions League. Think about match day 5 and 6 when a group's already been decided, and the quality of a game in the Champions League. We've seen it loads of times at Old Trafford. I've seen it a few times at Manchester City. When if there's not promotion or relegation, who's going to bother watching the game when 8ths play 9th in the European Super League, when 8th and 9th can't win a title? There's not going to be any relegation. No. The quality of football will be absolutely rubbish. There's nothing wrong with this structure of English football. There never has been, never will be. It's absolutely fine the way it works. If it's not broken, don't mend it. I mean, I have two sort of like dream fixtures. I've got friends in the lower echelons of non-league football. So I have a dream fixture of Bacup Borough versus Barcelona. And also coming from Nelson, where I come from, my local team has the distinction of being the first English team ever to beat Real Madrid, which I always get into anybody who's prepared to listen. 1923, we beat them 4-2. But the thing is, we still have a chance of playing them again, because the structure of English football is you go from the Northwest Counties League, the First Division, to the Premier League, that's level 5, to the Northern Premier League Division 2, to the Northern Premier League Premier Division, to the Conference North or South, to the National League, Conference League. Then you go into League 2, to League 1, to the Championship, to the Premier League, and you finish in the top 4. You get a chance to play Real Madrid potentially in the draw. You know, nothing wrong with it.
No, I'm with you, and because I'm from Halifax, so Halifax is, you know, my home team really. So I do dream of like a Halifax Manchester United match one day. I never thought about Europe, but if it was Halifax Manchester United,
the pyramid allows it to happen, Ruth. It can still technically happen.
I'm going to think about that.
But it's still possible. We can still have Nelson against Real Madrid and Bacup Borough against Barcelona. Why not? It's there. I'm still dreaming of it.
I never thought big enough. I just thought Manchester United, I'll have to go bigger with them. And they're doing all right this year. They're doing all right. Halifax, they're doing very well. So people are probably very familiar with you on Sky Sports, but what they might not be aware of is that you've also changed careers slightly or bring something else in. I wondered if you're happy to talk about that.
Yeah, of course I am. Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, became a funeral celebrant.
And what prompted that?
I think when the first problems started with COVID in late February and early March 2020, and I was sitting around with like no work on or wondering what the future held, not sure what the future of football was going to look like, because being a freelance, I would pick up on a lot of like odd jobs and, you know, maybe interview the Barnsley manager on a Thursday and maybe do you know, something with the Huddersfield Town manager on a Friday. That type of thing that I would pick up on.
Yeah.
It stopped and probably has stopped because nobody's allowed access to the training grounds. Everything's been done over Zoom. Everything's been done on computer. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen work-wise. What I did realise from the first sort of 3 months of the first lockdown was that if this is what retirement's like, I don't want to know about it. I'm not interested in it because I hated having nothing to do and being inactive. And I just, funny enough, before Mum died, we went to a funeral of one of her neighbours. It was actually the last time she ever left the house in December 2019. And we went to a funeral, and it was done by a family member who did a good job. And Mum said, like, if you can give the families and the bereaved comfort, you know, like he did, you're onto something, you know. And I'm sort of like semi-thought about being a funeral celebrant in old age or later life, if you know. I mean,
right.
Not necessarily now, but I thought I would potentially do it when I was in my 60s, you know, maybe at the back end.
Right.
So I don't like sitting around, don't like doing anything, don't like doing nothing rather. I don't know how the football world is going to be reinvented again after COVID restrictions ease, or when they're going to ease, or whether we'll be allowed back in, or whether I'll pick up any odd jobs. There was a really good course on offer, a training course that I went to for 3 days in Liverpool in early August 2020. I just thought, I'll see where it takes me. I've always had ideas and views as to how a good service should look and sound. And daft as it sounds, you know, there's a lot of different crossovers between journalism and being a celebrant, in the sense that you're dealing with people all the time. Obviously, you've got to ask questions about the deceased. You want to know as much about the deceased's life as possible. So the more lines and the more angles you've got. And obviously, from a journalistic point of view, when you've got material, somebody as experienced as myself knows how to run that material or put it into an order, So the actual eulogy writing is like, I do it in a journalistic way. So it's in order and it fits, and I like to bring the stories to life, the humorous stories, the good stories. So it's something that I can quite easily do. I've been speaking into microphones for best part of 40 years. So instead of speaking into a radio microphone or into a TV microphone down a camera, you're speaking to a congregation, but you're still speaking into a microphone. So I just thought I'd give it a go and see where it takes me. Try and be the best that I can with it, and yeah, it's proved successful so far. I keep getting asked to do things all the time, so hopefully I'm doing something right.
I'm sure you are. So do you work for yourself, or do you work out with a funeral directors? How does that bit work?
No, I'm freelance, but I work for a number of different directors on a regular basis.
Okay. And I bet it's quite popular to have someone that's of no particular faith denomination and just comes in and does a funeral that's very much about, the person that's died.
Well, I have a simple mantra regarding this. In journalism, I always play the way that the manager tells me to play. There are certain people that you produce television for that want things done in a certain way.
Yes.
So rather than say, I think we should use these pictures for the opening, no, I know he wants it. I know what they are requesting and what they're looking for. It's no good doing it myself and thinking mine's better than what he would want, because he'll just call you back in and rip it to bits and tell you to do it the way that he wants it. So yes. I've always developed a way of playing for, do what the producer or the manager tells you to do. It's quite simple, really. And it's the same with being a funeral celebrant. Whatever the family want, they can have. It's simple. There's many ways of doing. People have their own thoughts, their own requests, and it's quite straightforward. It's just do it the way that they want it.
Yeah.
So it's just as simple as that. They can be semi-religious. There are times when people would like prayers in it or certain verses in it. Yes, that's absolutely fine. It's totally neutral. Respect everybody's faith and respect everybody's religion. Not a problem with it at all. I don't believe in the humanist side of it, where somebody might ask for the Lord's Prayer and the humanist would say, no, you're not having it, you can't have it. That's sort of nonsense. Being a total neutral, whatever they want, it's my job to put it together for them and do it in a thoroughly professional manner. I try and take the same professional outlook that I would have for covering a game in radio or television. I said, we'll do for this. It's the same focus, the same outlook. I want to do a good job for them. Because there's one thing that's for sure, the best that I know of, nobody usually has two funerals. You only usually get one, so you're only going to get one crack at it. So in my opinion, it's going to be right. I don't see that as pressure. I'm quite happy with it, because it's like peering down the TV lens. It's got to be right. You've got to get the scorer and the information right. Yes. Or when you're doing a radio report, it has to be condensed. It has to be the way that the requirement is. If I'm working for independent radio news, they want 25 seconds, or into the news bulletin, they want 20 seconds. So it has to be 20 or 25 seconds. So that's not pressure for me. I sort of relish that. It helps me get into the zone to make sure that hopefully the service that they're going to get is going to be a good one. Because there's no second chance. It has to be right.
So I imagine that you've been really quite busy the last year or so doing this, but how do you manage to switch off, after, if it's kind of one funeral very quickly followed by another? Do you find that your brain gets a bit clogged by all the sadness, or are you okay?
No, I'm all right with it. Strangely enough, I don't know how or why. I mean, listen, there's things that like really churn you inside. Things that are not right in life. I did one for a lady a couple of weeks ago. Not overly elderly and very, very sprightly and certainly in good health for her age. But how can you conduct a funeral for somebody's son? That saddens me when parents burying the children or having the children cremated. Yeah. I can never get my head around that. Can never get my head around suicide victims and his children, sons and daughters, at the front of the congregation. And the sadness when you see a lady walk down the aisle, a lady who'd been married for 71 years, sort of in tears, walking into the chapel. That sort of thing. Yeah, I share that grief with them. I share their anguish in that sense. But the only thing that I can do then is to make sure that I deliver a good service for them, yes. and that it's fit into the person who's gone. That sort of anguish gets me into the zone. I like being in the zone on Soccer Saturday. I love the zone. I love it when you've got the headset on. You can hear the program in the background. The producer is speaking to you whenever she speaks to you. I love that adrenaline. That adrenaline feeling is like, some people might think it's a scary place, but I like being there because it's focused and it's like a safe place for me. And when I feel that anguish of the people, the bereaved, that sort of anguish gets me into that similar zone on the gantry where this has got to be right. You've got to call this bang on. Your delivery's got to be spot on. Certain parts of it, can be powerful. Certain parts you're going to have to lower your voice to be in keeping with the eulogy or certain sensitive parts to it.
Yes.
Yeah, but no, I just go with it. Nobody, no celebrant will ever get their head around some of the tragic circumstances that you find yourself in. But all you can do is deliver the best service that you possibly can.
Yes. And if people want to get in touch with you for you to be their celebrant, how would they do that?
Just get hold of me via Twitter's a good way to get hold of me. Yeah, simple way. I don't tweet very often.
No, you
but
don't.
I always check my feed. So anybody can get somebody funny enough got hold of me last week about the footballing matter actually. So I'm easily obtainable. Just my Twitter feed is at P Smith Sky Sports. Anybody can get hold of me.
Okie dokie, that's great. To just go back to the football and how things have changed since you started in journalism. Anyone that's thinking of doing that kind of thing now, getting into sports journalism, what would you advise?
Come to my private classes. come to my media schools. I've done a lot of coaching. Well, I was doing quite a bit of coaching up until the first lockdown in 2020, and I had big plans for my media school, and things were just about to kick off, and then obviously, unfortunately, COVID ruined them. Yeah. What I would say is that if people are serious, they've got to show proper interest. What I tend to find is doing bits in universities here and there. I think it's like university these days is like an extension of college. It's almost like 10th, 11th, and 12th form, if you will.
All right.
And people go in and they want to mess around and they don't really want to learn about the profession that they're supposed to be wanting to learn about. They want to carry on living a sort of like school life and having a laugh and having a giggle.
Right.
And that doesn't work. If you're serious about sports journalism, you've got to understand how the industry works and what goes on. And that's how I coach. I coach the way it is. I tell it the way it is.
Well, that's the best way, isn't it?
Yeah. But sometimes you find I find you get academics who know more about sports journalism than I do. So I say, well, I've never seen you at Old Trafford. I've never seen you at Man City. I've never seen you at Anfield. Never seen you anywhere. And they know more about it than I do because they've read it all out of a book type thing. Which is fine. I accept that. But the best coaches are the ones who are still doing the job, or the ones who are battle hardened, and the ones who've had to ask questions and stories. You can always recognise the ones who've got potential. There are too many people who go on these courses that are not serious about it. My private classes are all about the real world of journalism. Quite simple.
Well, that's what you want, I think. If you've, decided that's your career, that's what you want to do. Especially now that you have to pay for university. I don't see the point in just going and wasting, all those years getting yourself into debt and coming out with no useful knowledge?
There's an awful lot you've got to learn and an awful lot you've got to perfect, and there are simple things that you have to understand, the way that organizations want them done.
Yes.
Like earlier about playing the way that the manager tells you to play. You do what you're requested to do via the employer, and also as well the front line. I mean, you know yourself, Ruth, from working for Manchester United Radio. You understand the force of the tabloids, don't you? The
Yes.
tabloid newspapers. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And these are the sort of things you've got to impress the people who want to come into the industry. This is the environment you're going to be working in. These are what these guys are going to do.
Yes.
These are the powerhouses of the industry.
Yeah.
So my coaching is all about this is what we do in the industry, and how to be prepared, how to be streetwise, and how to be able to do the basic things that journalism demands of people who work within it.
What always surprised me was because the radio station was right next to the press box and the press lounge, and you could, get to know the journalists. It always surprised me that the tabloid journalists would all work together on a story and quotes, but you wouldn't see the same story come out in each other's newspaper. There would be a slightly different angle on it, a slightly different take. So there was always something there for everybody. And I'd never really, from being outside reading newspapers before, starting there, I never really thought about how stories were put together and how they all colluded so that they all got something from it.
Well, these are the sort of things and the sort of tricks of the trade that I mentioned, and I was talking about earlier in the interview about leaving hospital radio, and covering United for the first time. I always remember you talk about your hero Brian Robson. He in the late 80s was like a huge star, one of the biggest stars on the planet. And I remember for my United club call, getting an interview with him. Lasted about 6 minutes, and I thought I'll show, I'll put it out in its 6 minute duration in entirety, naively thinking, aren't I good? I've got this great interview with Brian Robson. And then the following day, after I'd used it, him seeing me at the training ground, absolutely fuming, because all of the national newspapers had listened to that interview on Manchester United club call. You could put all the quotes down, twisted them, spun them in sensational back page headlines, double inside spreads. So there's me thinking, I'm all big and clever because I've got a big interview with Brian Robson. Yes. And he's shouting at me and saying, I'm not going to speak to you again, blaming me for all the back page sensationalism that there was. So things like that you have to understand. You learn quick. If you don't,
I was going to say, you learn your lesson early.
There's other things as well that you've got to impress on young people. This is how the industry works. This is what goes on. Yeah.
No, it is an eye-opener, and I bet your course is fantastic in teaching people that, and I hope that they know that what you're teaching them is really kind of useful information that they can take down the track and do something with. But like you say, there's nothing better than kind of being boots on the floor and seeing it for yourself and learning it and making your mistakes and going forward.
It's life experience, Ruth. Like I said to you before, at universities, I don't pretend to be well educated. I'm not. I can't. They can get the academic people can get somebody's degree for the students better than I can. They coach that side of it better, but they can't coach what I can coach because they've never been there. There's nobody I know who coaches who's had 25 years with the greatest manager that ever lived. Well, there's nobody I know in that industry who was in his doghouse for 3.5 years. And what sort of experiences and these are the sort of things that you pass on to help people be aware of what it's going to be like if and when they break into the industry.
Yes. Yeah, and let's hope lots of people do. Pete, it's been absolutely fantastic chatting with you. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
You're very welcome. Good luck with your project as well, Ruth.
Thank you.
Everything with what you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this interview, we've got lots coming up as well. So just kind of hit subscribe and also hit like or put any messages below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. So I look forward to seeing you again all soon.